The room smelled of old hymnals and forgotten promises. Ruth Holloway sat on the edge of a cot that wasn't hers, in a space that had never been meant for living. The church basement had concrete walls painted the color of institutional hope, beige, forgettable. The kind of place people passed through but never remembered. She was 80 years old. Her hands, which had once typed 70 words per minute in the administrative offices of Clarkson and Webb, now trembled slightly when she buttoned her coat. Not from weakness, from cold. The basement was always cold. 2 cardboard boxes sat against the wall. Everything she owned. A lifetime compressed into containers that once held copier paper. She stared at them the way a person stares at evidence of their own erasure. 14 days. That's what Pastor Michaels had said. His voice gentle but firm, the way people speak when they're asking you to understand something they themselves can barely justify. We can give you 2 more weeks, Ruth. After that, we need the space for the winter shelter program. She had nodded, smiled even. Of course. I understand. Thank you for your kindness. She understood perfectly. She understood that kindness had limits. She understood that gratitude was currency when you had nothing else to spend. She understood that at 80 you became a problem other people solved with soft voices and hard timelines. The fluorescent light above her flickered. Once, twice. Then held. Ruth watched it the way she watched everything now, waiting to see if it would fail. Her fingers found the edge of something in her coat pocket. Paper. Old. She pulled it out slowly. A note her father had given her when she was 17. The ink had faded to the color of old bruises, but the words were still clear. Never trust the room everyone wants. Pay attention to the one no one enters. She had carried it for 63 years. Through a marriage that had been good until it ended. Through a mortgage that had been manageable until it wasn't. Through a son who had been close until distance became easier than presence. Ruth folded the note and put it back. Her father had been a janitor at the county courthouse. He'd seen things. He'd understood that the world was divided into those who took space and those who apologized for needing it. The door at the top of the stairs opened. Footsteps, heavy, confident, the kind that didn't ask permission. Garrett. Her son appeared at the bottom of the stairs, already talking before he reached her. He had his father's build, but none of his patience. 40-hour work weeks had carved lines into his face that made him look older than 52. Or maybe it was the expression he wore whenever he looked at her. The one that said he was solving a problem he hadn't created but somehow inherited. Mom. He didn't sit. There was nowhere to sit except the cot, and sitting would have meant staying longer than he intended. I got a call from Pastor Michaels. Ruth said nothing. He said you have 2 weeks. I know. Garrett ran a hand through his hair. The gesture of a man buying time before saying something he'd already decided. Mom, we've talked about this. You can't keep doing this. Moving from place to place. Wearing out people's patience. I'm not wearing out anything, Ruth said quietly. I'm grateful for what they've given me. Grateful? Garrett's voice sharpened. You shouldn't have to be grateful. You should have options. Real options. Ruth looked at him. She had loved this face when it was small and unguarded. When it had looked at her like she held all the answers, now it looked at her like she was the question he couldn't solve. There are assisted living facilities, he continued. Good ones. I've been researching. You'd have your own room. Meals, activities, people your age, people waiting to die, Ruth said. That's not fair. Neither is asking me to give up before I'm ready. Garrett exhaled slowly, the sound of a man who had practiced patience and found it insufficient. Mom, you're 80. This isn't about giving up. It's about being realistic. Realistic. Ruth tasted the word. It was the same one he'd used 3 years ago when he'd stood in her kitchen. Papers spread across the table explaining why selling the house was the only logical choice. The only practical solution. She had signed the papers. She had believed him. She had thought that letting go would make things easier. It hadn't. Where would I go? She asked. Garrett hesitated. That pause told her everything. There was no room in his house, no guest bedroom that would become hers, no space that wasn't already spoken for by his wife, his daughter, his life that had no margins for an 80-year-old woman who had become inconvenient. We'll figure something out, he said. The words people use when they mean someone else will figure it out. Just not this. Not living in church basements. Ruth reached for her coat. I have somewhere to be. Where does it matter? Garrett's jaw tightened. Everything you do matters to me, Mom. That's why I'm here. No. Ruth stood slowly, her knees protesting but obeying. You're here because you feel guilty. There's a difference. She walked past him toward the stairs. He didn't follow. She didn't expect him to. At the top of the stairs, she paused. The morning light coming through the church windows was thin and gray. Outside, the world moved at a speed that had left her behind somewhere between 65 and 70. She couldn't remember exactly when. Just that one day she had looked up and realized everyone was speaking a language she no longer understood. Efficiency, practicality, downsizing, words that meant you take up too much space. Ruth pulled the newspaper from her bag. She had found it yesterday, folded on a bench at the bus stop. Someone's discard. Most of it was weather and sports and politics that didn't touch her. But there on page 7, a small notice. County auction. Unclaimed properties. Friday, 10 a.m. She had circled it in pencil. Not because she had money to spend. She had $43 in her purse. But because the notice had used a phrase that caught her attention. Items of no determined value. Ruth knew something about being assigned no value. She stepped outside. The October air bit at her face. The church parking lot was empty except for her car. A 1997 Honda Civic with a rust spot on the driver's door and an engine that started on the third try if you were patient. She got in, turned the key. Once, twice, 3 times. The engine coughed, hesitated, then caught. Ruth sat for a moment, hands on the wheel, staring at nothing. Then she put the car in drive and headed toward the county administration building. The auction room was exactly what she expected. Folding chairs arranged in rows. A podium at the front. A table with a bored-looking clerk shuffling papers. The air smelled of floor wax and the particular staleness that comes from rooms that are only used once a month. Ruth took a seat in the back row. Around her, men in work boots and women with calculators scanned printed lists. Professional buyers. People who turned other people's abandoned things into profit. They spoke in low voices about lot numbers and resale values and whether the storage unit on Maple Street was worth the drive. She didn't belong here. She knew it. They knew it. But no one said anything. In rooms like this, everyone was invisible until they bid. The clerk, a man named Frank Pearson, according to the nameplate on the table, cleared his throat. The sound brought a kind of order to the room. Not silence, just attention. Item 1, he began. Residential lot, County Road 47. Tax delinquent. Starting bid $500. Someone in the third row raised a hand. Sold in 40 seconds. Item 2. Storage unit contents facility B. Starting bid $75. The rhythm was mechanical. Pearson read. Someone bid. Someone won. The room moved through abandoned properties the way water moves around stones. Efficiently. Without feeling. Ruth watched. She wasn't sure what she was waiting for, just that the note in her pocket seemed to hum slightly against her chest. Pay attention to the one no one enters. Item 23. Item 30. Item 39. The room was getting restless. Most of the interesting lots were gone. What remained were the things no one wanted. Broken sheds, landlocked parcels, structures with more problems than potential. Item 47. Pearson's voice had gone flat with repetition. He adjusted his glasses, squinted at the paper in front of him. Unregistered underground residential structure. Location County Route 14, approximately 8 miles northwest of town limits. Condition unknown. No access verified. A pause. Then someone in the front row laughed. Short, sharp. What is that, a grave more laughter? Looser now. The kind that fills space when there's nothing else to do. Pearson didn't smile. Starting bid, he said. $5. The laughter got louder. Someone behind Ruth muttered, Might as well auction off the air we're breathing. $5? Pearson repeated. Do I have $5? Silence. Not the kind that holds possibility. The kind that closes it. Ruth's hand moved before her mind caught up. She raised it. Slowly. Steadily. The way you raise your hand when you've already decided and the room's opinion doesn't matter. Pearson's eyes found hers. For just a moment, something passed across his face. Recognition. Not of her. Of something else. Then his expression smoothed back into professional neutrality. We have $5, he said. A man in the front row turned around. He was younger. 50s, maybe. The kind of face that had smiled easily once, but had hardened into something sharper. He looked at Ruth the way people look at accidents, with fascination and discomfort. Ma'am, he said loud enough for everyone to hear. You know what you're bidding on? Ruth met his eyes. Yes. Because that's basically a hole in the ground, probably full of rats, or worse. I heard the description Ruth said. The man smiled. Not kindly. At your age, you're buying yourself a burial plot. The room erupted. Real laughter now, the kind that people don't bother to hide. Someone else joined in, voice carrying from the left side. "You sure you don't want something above ground, ma'am? Might be easier to get out of." Ruth turned her head just enough to acknowledge him. Her voice was calm, even. "I'm not planning on leaving." That stopped the laughter. Not because it was funny, because it wasn't. Pearson cleared his throat again. "Do we have any other bids?" No one spoke. "Sold," Pearson said. He tapped the gavel once. "For $5. To the woman in the back. The room moved on. Item 48. Item 49. Ruth became part of the furniture again. Invisible. Forgettable. Except to Pearson. When the auction ended and people filed out discussing their purchases and their plans and their next opportunities, Ruth made her way to the front desk. Pearson was organizing papers. He didn't look up right away, just pulled a thin folder from a stack and set it on the counter. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "no one's claimed that property in 43 years. Ruth took the folder with both hands. The paper was yellowed at the edges, the kind of bureaucratic artifact that had been passed over more times than it had been read. "That doesn't mean no one needed it," she said. Pearson looked at her then. Really looked. His eyes were the color of old photographs, faded but still holding detail. He opened his mouth, closed it, then said, 43 years. She'd be glad. Who? But Pearson was already turning away, stacking the next set of files. Ruth stood there for a moment, the folder in her hands, the weight of it heavier than it should have been. She walked out of the county building into the pale afternoon light. Behind her, the people who had laughed were already in their trucks, already moving toward their next acquisitions. They had forgotten her. She hadn't forgotten them. Ruth got into her car. The folder sat on the passenger seat. She opened it carefully. Inside, a single sheet with an address that wasn't quite an address. County Route 14, mile marker 8.3, northwest. Look for the clearing. No map, no photograph. Just coordinates and a suggestion. Below that, a handwritten note, nearly erased by time. The ink so faint it looked like a ghost of language. Some things wait. Ruth closed the folder, started the car, and drove. The road northwest was the kind that forgot. It belonged to the county. Paved once, maybe, but now more patch than pavement. Trees pressed close on both sides, their branches forming a tunnel that turned the afternoon dim. Ruth drove slowly, watching the mile markers. 7, 7.5, 8. At 8.3, there was nothing. Just trees and a ditch and more trees. She pulled over, got out, stood at the edge of the road looking. The clearing was there, if you knew to look for it. A gap in the trees that wasn't quite natural. Grass grown wild, but in a pattern that suggested something underneath. Something that had once been flattened, used. Ruth stepped off the road. Her shoes sensible flats worn smooth at the heels pressed into uneven ground. The grass was knee-high, unmowed for years. Decades, maybe. It bent in different directions like it couldn't decide which way to grow. She walked forward, slow, deliberate. her breath steady despite the pounding in her chest. Not fear. Something else. Something she didn't have a name for yet. 50 feet in, she saw it. A patch of metal, half buried beneath weeds and dirt. Rusted. Heavy. Real. Ruth stopped in front of it. Her hand found the edge of the hatch and rested there. The metal was cold despite the sun. Cold the way things are cold when they've been underground too long. She knelt, slowly, her knees protesting, her hands already reaching for the edges, brushing away the dirt with steady strokes. The weeds came away easily. Underneath the outline of a steel hatch, 4 feet by 4 feet. Industrial. The kind of thing built to last. There was a handle, recessed. Ruth gripped it with both hands and pulled. Nothing. She adjusted her stance, pulled again, harder. The hinges groaned, a sound like the earth itself resisting. But then, slowly, the seal broke. Air hissed out. Not stale, not rotten, just still. The kind of still that comes from being held too long. Ruth lifted the hatch all the way. It fell back with a dull thud against the ground. Below, darkness. And below the darkness, concrete stairs descending. A railing bolted to the wall, rusted but intact. She stood at the edge, looking down. Most people would have stopped here. Most people would have called someone, asked for help, for permission, for assurance. Ruth stepped onto the first stair. It held. The temperature dropped immediately. Not cold, just cooler. The kind of chill that belongs to places the sun never touches. She descended carefully, one hand on the railing, one hand trailing along the wall. Behind her, the light from above shrank to a distant square. The stairs went down farther than she expected. 20 steps, 30. Her shoes echoed softly against concrete. The sound swallowed almost immediately by the space below. At the bottom, her feet met a floor. Smooth, level. She waited, letting her eyes adjust. Shapes began to form in the dimness. A hallway, narrow, lined with exposed pipes and old wiring. The walls were unfinished. Concrete block, utilitarian. As if whoever built this had run out of time or money or both. But then, above her, a light flickered. Once, twice, then held, dim, yellow, but working. Ruth looked up at it. "You don't flicker like that after 43 years, she said aloud. Her voice didn't echo. The space absorbed it. She moved forward. To her left, a small room opened. A kitchen of sorts. Metal counters, a sink. Cabinets coated in dust but not decay. She ran her fingers along the surface. A thin layer of dirt came away. Beneath it, clean. Not new. Not untouched. Just preserved. On the right, another room. Storage. Shelves lined with containers. Some empty. Some sealed. Labels faded but still visible. Dates. 1982. 1983. Inventory markings. Careful handwriting. Someone had organized this. Someone had expected to come back. Ruth stepped back into the hallway. It stretched ahead, narrowing slightly before ending at something that didn't belong. A door, not metal like the hatch above, not concrete like the walls around it. Wood, smooth, polished. The kind of wood that belonged in a home, not a bunker. Ruth approached slowly. The door was dark, rich, walnut maybe. Completely out of place in a structure that otherwise felt unfinished and forgotten. There was no handle on the outside, just a recessed grip and a keyhole set into the center. She reached out, her palm pressed gently against the wood. Warm. Ruth pulled her hand back instinctively. Her breath caught. That's not possible. The air around her was cool. The walls were cold. Everything in this place obeyed the rules of abandonment and time. Except this. Her eyes dropped to the keyhole. The key. The one that had come with the folder from Pearson. The one she'd slipped into her coat pocket without thinking. It felt heavier now. Ruth stood there, one hand still raised, the other reaching into her pocket. The key was small, ordinary, the kind you'd find in a junk drawer. But when her fingers closed around it, it was warm too. She brought it to the keyhole. It slid in without resistance. No scrape. No hesitation. As if it had been waiting. Ruth turned it. A soft click answered. Not loud. Not dramatic. Certain. She didn't open the door right away. She listened first. Silence. Then she pulled. The door didn't creak. It opened smoothly, soundlessly, and light poured through the gap. Warm light. Not the harsh flicker of failing bulbs. Not the pale gray of something forgotten. This was different. Alive. Ruth stepped back instinctively, her hand tightening against the edge of the door as it opened wider on its own weight. And then she saw it. It wasn't a room. It was a home. The air changed first, warmer, softer, carrying a faint scent of wood and something clean, almost like linen. The floor beneath her feet shifted from cold concrete to polished hardwood, smooth, steady. She stepped inside without realizing she had moved. A living room stretched out before her, lit by recessed lights that glowed like late afternoon sun. A long couch sat against the wall, cushions untouched but not stiff. A rug lay centered beneath a low table, its fibers clean, undisturbed by dust. Bookshelves lined the far side, filled, organized, intentional. Ruth's breath slowed. This, she said quietly, the word fading before it could become anything more. She turned slowly, taking it in piece by piece. A kitchen to the right, modern, complete, stocked with utensils placed exactly where they should be, not for display, for use. A hallway beyond that, a door slightly ajar revealing a bedroom, made, prepared, waiting. No signs of decay, no signs of abandonment, only absence. As if someone had built this place, stepped out for a moment, and never returned. Never. Ruth moved forward, her steps careful, but no longer uncertain. Her fingers brushed the back of a chair, solid, real. On the wall, a framed photograph, too distant to make out clearly, but not old enough to belong to the rest of the structure. This wasn't forgotten, she whispered. It was left. At the center of the room stood a wooden table, simple, strong, and on it an envelope. Ruth stopped. Her name wasn't written on it, but something about it felt addressed. She approached slowly, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if trying to understand something just beyond reach. The paper was thick, cream-colored, sealed but not hidden, waiting. Her hand hovered above it, then lowered. She picked it up. For a second, nothing happened. No revelation, no sound, just the weight of it in her hand. Ruth turned it over. Her thumb traced the edge of the seal. She hesitated, not out of fear, but out of something quieter. Recognition. I don't even know who you are, she said softly, as if the room itself might answer. The room remained still, patient. She opened the envelope. Inside, a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was steady, careful, not rushed. She read the first line, and everything inside her stilled. To the woman they cast aside. Ruth's breath caught, not because of the words themselves, but because of how precisely they found her. Her grip tightened slightly around the paper as she read on, each sentence pulling her deeper into something she couldn't yet explain. If you're standing here, it means you chose what no one else would. It means you stayed where others turned away. And it means you understand the value of a place that doesn't ask you to leave. Ruth lowered the paper just enough to look around again, at the light, the warmth, the quiet. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was passing through someone else's space. She felt expected. Her eyes moved back to the letter. This place was never meant for everyone. Only for the one who would stay when leaving was easier. My name is Thomas Monroe. I built this for a woman named Sarah. She never got to live here, but I finished it anyway. Because some things aren't built for the person who asks for them. They're built for the person who needs them and doesn't know how to ask. Ruth's hand trembled slightly. She kept reading. If you found this, it means the world tried to erase you too. It means you know what it's like to be told you're too much or too little or too late. I'm sorry for that. But I'm also grateful because it means you're the right person. Her throat tightened. She swallowed and read the last lines. Stay as long as you need. This place is yours now. Not because I'm giving it to you, but because you found it. And finding something is different from taking it. You earned this by surviving, by continuing, by refusing to disappear. The letter was signed simply, Thomas. Below that, a date, April 1983. Ruth set the letter down carefully on the table. Her hands were shaking now, not from cold, from something breaking open inside her chest. Something that had been closed for so long she'd forgotten it was there. She looked around the room again, at the books, the furniture, the care in every detail. Someone had built this. Not for show, not for profit, for survival, for dignity, for her. A sound echoed faintly from above. Metal. Movement. Ruth froze. The silence that followed was no longer empty. It was listening. Slowly, carefully, she folded the letter and slipped it into her coat. Her gaze lifted toward the door behind her, the one she'd come through. The warm wooden door that separated this impossible home from the cold concrete corridor beyond. For the first time since she'd arrived, she wasn't alone. She moved quickly now. Back through the door, back into the hallway, the light above her still flickering, still holding. She reached the stairs and climbed. At the top, daylight hit her face, sharp and real. And there, parked 20 feet from her car, was a black SUV. 2 men stood beside it, dressed too well for the middle of nowhere. One was tall, 50s, the kind of face that smiled in business meetings and foreclosure hearings with equal ease. The other was younger, harder, his eyes scanning the field like he was cataloging property lines. The taller man saw her emerge from the hatch. His expression shifted. Surprise first, then something else. Interest. "Mrs. Holloway," he called out. His voice was smooth, practiced. "We were hoping we'd catch you." Ruth didn't answer immediately. She pulled herself up onto the surface, brushing dirt from her hands, before meeting his eyes. "I don't remember inviting anyone," she said. The man smiled, extended his hand. "James Carver, Carver Holdings. This is my associate, Mr. Preston." Ruth didn't take his hand. "What can I do for you, Mr. Carver?" Carver lowered his hand smoothly. "No offense taken. Actually, Mrs. Holloway, I'm here to do something for you." He glanced toward the hatch. Still open. Still revealing the darkness below. "That's quite a purchase you made today." "It's mine," Ruth said simply. "Of course it is." Carver's smile widened slightly. "And that's exactly why I'm here. You see, my company specializes in land development. When I heard about the auction, I looked into the property. It has potential, more than you might realize." Ruth said nothing. "I'd like to make you an offer." Carver continued. "Right now, today, $25,000. Cash. For the property and everything on it." The silence stretched. Preston shifted his weight. Carver kept smiling. Ruth looked at him, then at the hatch, then back at Carver. "No," she said. The smile thinned. "Mrs. Holloway, with all respect, you paid $5 for this. I'm offering you 5,000 times that. That's not an opportunity. That's a gift." "Then give it to someone else," Ruth said. Carver's expression hardened slightly. "There are legal complications with unregistered properties, surveys, permits, liability issues. At your age, those aren't things you want to deal with." "At my age," Ruth said quietly, "I've dealt with worse." Another pause. Then Carver reached into his coat and pulled out a business card. He set it on the hood of Ruth's car. "Think about it," he said. "Call me when you're ready to be reasonable." He nodded to Preston. They got back into the SUV. The engine started. Smooth. Expensive. They drove away slowly. As if to emphasize they weren't in a hurry, Ruth waited until the dust settled. Then she picked up the business card. Carver Holdings, Development, Acquisitions. A phone number. She folded it once and put it in her pocket next to the letter from Thomas. Then she looked back at the hatch, at the stairs descending into the dark, at the place that had waited 43 years for someone to find it. Ruth Holloway stood alone in a field no one wanted, holding a key to a home no one knew existed. And for the first time in 3 years, she smiled. Not because she was happy, because she was no longer lost. She climbed back down into the earth, pulled the hatch closed behind her, and went home. Ruth didn't sleep that first night. Not because the bed wasn't comfortable. It was. More comfortable than the cot in the church basement. More comfortable than any place she'd slept in the past 3 years. But comfort after deprivation feels suspicious. Like a door that might close at any moment. She lay in the bedroom Thomas had prepared, staring at the ceiling. The recessed lights had dimmed on their own around 10. Some kind of timer, she guessed. Built in. Intentional. The darkness that followed wasn't complete. A soft glow came from somewhere. Emergency lighting, maybe. Just enough to see shapes. The room smelled faintly of cedar. The kind of smell that comes from careful storage. From things wrapped and protected and waiting. The closet door was slightly open. Inside, she'd found blankets, pillows, linens still in plastic. Everything you'd need to set up a home. Everything except the person to live in it. Sarah never got to live here. That line from Thomas's letter kept circling through Ruth's mind. A woman who had needed this place, who had been promised it, but who had never made it through that warm wooden door. Ruth wondered what had happened. Disease, probably. That's what took people in their 70s. Quietly. Efficiently. The body deciding it was done before the person was ready. She wondered if Sarah had known about this place. If Thomas had shown her the plans. If she had died knowing there was somewhere waiting for her that the world couldn't touch. Or if she had died still believing she had nowhere to go. Ruth turned over. The mattress didn't creak. New. Or preserved so well it might as well be. Her hand found the edge of the blanket and held it, just to hold something real. Outside this room, outside this underground sanctuary, Carver was making plans. She knew men like him, had typed their letters once, filed their contracts, watched them move through offices with the confidence of people who believed the world bent toward their intentions. $25,000. It was more money than she'd seen in years. More than enough to solve immediate problems. A deposit on a small apartment. First and last month's rent. Enough left over to breathe for a while, without counting pennies. But she'd said no. Not because she was brave, because she recognized the offer for what it was. The opening bid in a negotiation she hadn't agreed to have. If Carver was willing to pay $25,000 for a hole in the ground, it meant the hole was worth more. Ruth closed her eyes. Sleep came eventually. Not deep, not restful, but it came. In the morning, the lights brightened gradually, like a sunrise simulation. Ruth woke slowly, her body confused about where she was. Then she remembered. Underground. Safe. Home. She sat up. Her knees protested less than usual. The air down here was different. Not damp like basements usually were. Dry, controlled. Thomas had built ventilation, climate control, systems that still worked after 4 decades. This wasn't a bunker. It was a residence. Ruth made her way to the kitchen. The cabinets were stocked, not with food. That would have spoiled, but with dishes, pots, utensils. A coffee maker that looked like it had never been used. She opened drawers, found silverware, napkins, everything organized with the precision of someone who understood that small comforts mattered. She needed to go back up, get supplies, figure out how to live down here without anyone knowing. But first, she needed to understand this place. Ruth walked back into the living room. The bookshelves drew her attention again. She approached them slowly, her fingers trailing along the spines. Literature, history, philosophy, practical guides on gardening, home repair, self-sufficiency. Books chosen by someone who understood that isolation required preparation. She pulled one at random. The cover was worn but intact. Inside the margins held notes, neat handwriting, observations, questions. Someone had read these books carefully, had engaged with them. Ruth closed it and set it back. Her eyes moved to the wall beside the shelves. Something about it looked slightly off. The paneling didn't sit quite flush. A seam ran vertically, nearly invisible unless you were looking for it. She pressed against it. Nothing. Tried again, firmer this time. A soft click answered. The panel loosened, shifted just enough to reveal a narrow space behind it. Ruth pulled it open. Inside letters, dozens of them, stacked neatly, tied with a faded ribbon, protected, not hidden, preserved. She stared at them for a long moment before reaching in. The paper felt older than the letter she'd found on the table, but preserved the same way, carefully, intentionally. Ruth untied the ribbon slowly. The first letter she opened wasn't addressed to her. It was addressed to someone named Sarah. "My dearest Sarah," it began. "I know you don't want to leave your home. I know you believe that staying and fighting is the right thing to do. And maybe you're right. Maybe dignity requires standing your ground, even when the ground is being taken from you." Ruth's throat tightened. She read on. "But I'm building this place anyway. Not because I think you'll run. Because I think you deserve somewhere that can be taken. Somewhere the city council can't vote on. Somewhere developers can't claim for the public good. A place that's yours. Not because a deed says so, but because you're standing in it." Ruth lowered the letter. Her hand was shaking slightly. She reached for another. "They've started the paperwork, Sarah. Eminent domain. They're calling it urban renewal. Progress. A better future for everyone. Everyone except the people who already live here. I've seen this before. In Detroit in '67. In Boston in '73. They take the neighborhoods no one powerful lives in and call it improvement." Another letter. The dates progressing. 1980, 1981, 1982. "I finished the eastern wall today. The ventilation system is running. Air quality is perfect. I know you think this is excessive. A retired architect building an underground home for a retired teacher. But Sarah, excessive is what love looks like when the world is taking everything else. Ruth's vision blurred. She blinked and kept reading. You ask me why I'm doing this. The answer is simple. Because 60 years ago, I watched my mother lose her home to a highway project. I watched her pack her life into boxes and move into my sister's basement. I watched her become smaller every day, not because she was weak, because the world had decided she didn't fit anymore. I won't watch that happen to you. Ruth set that letter down carefully. Her chest felt tight, not with pain, with recognition. She reached for more. The stack was thick, 40, maybe 50 letters, all from Thomas, all to Sarah. A one-sided conversation that spanned 3 years. The tone changed as the dates progressed. More urgent, more desperate. They gave you 60 days, Sarah. Please, just come see what I've built. You don't have to stay. Just know it's here. And then, near the bottom of the stack, I know you won't leave. I know you're going to fight until they physically remove you. And I love you for that. I love your stubbornness and your conviction, and your belief that right should matter more than power. But when they take your house, Sarah, when they tear it down and build whatever they're going to build, I need you to know something. You still have a home. It's 8 miles northwest of here, under a field no one wants, waiting. Ruth's hands trembled as she reached for the last envelope in the stack. It was different from the others, heavier. The date on it was April 1983. She opened it slowly. Inside, just a single page. No greeting. No dear Sarah, just words. She's gone. I buried her yesterday. Pneumonia, they said. But I think it was exhaustion. From fighting. From refusing to believe the world could be this cruel. She never saw this place. Never stepped through that door. Never knew if it would have been enough. I'm finishing it anyway. Every room. Every detail. Because she deserved it. And because someday, someone else will need it. Someone the world is trying to erase. Someone who understands what it means to have nowhere left to go. If you're reading this, you're that person. The letter wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. Ruth folded it carefully and placed it back with the others. Her eyes were wet. She wiped them with the back of her hand and took a breath. Then another. Sarah had been 72, fighting eviction, standing her ground until it killed her. Ruth was 80, and she'd already given up her ground once. Not again. She stood, her knees steady now, her hands no longer shaking. She retied the ribbon around the letters and placed them back in the hidden compartment. But as she did, her fingers brushed against something else, deeper in the space, hard, metal. Ruth reached in and pulled it out. A metal case, small, the size of a document box, locked. She turned it over in her hands. The lock wasn't complex, just a simple clasp. But it had been sealed deliberately. Protected. Ruth carried it to the table, set it down, stared at it for a moment. Then she went to the kitchen, found a butter knife, and worked the clasp. It resisted, then gave way with a sharp click. Inside documents, not letters, official papers. Stamped, dated, legal. Ruth lifted the first page. Her eyes scanned quickly, then slower. Then she sat down. It was a deed, original, from 1952. Property on Maple Street. Owner Sarah Catherine Monroe. Below that, a survey map. Property lines clearly marked. A small house, a yard. Sarah's home. Below that, correspondence. Letters from the city. Notices. Legal filings. The language was bureaucratic, sanitized. But the message was clear. Eminent domain. Public necessity. Compensation offered. The compensation was insultingly low. $3,000 for a home and property worth 10 times that. Ruth kept reading. Sarah had fought, filed objections, requested hearings. Every step documented, every step denied. And then at the bottom of the stack, something that made Ruth's breath catch. A transfer document, dated June 1980, showing Sarah's property being transferred to the City Development Authority. Except Sarah's signature wasn't on it. Ruth stared at it, looked closer. The signature line was blank. No name, no date. Just a stamp. Approved. Filed. Processed. They hadn't just taken Sarah's home. They'd forged the paperwork to make it legal. Ruth's hands tightened on the document. She kept digging. More papers. More maps. And then something else. A trust document. Dated March 1983. The language was dense, legal, but the core was clear. Thomas had created a trust, placed this underground property into it with one condition. Property reverts to resident if occupied for 30 consecutive days. Cannot be seized, cannot be claimed, cannot be transferred without resident consent. Ruth read it again, then a third time, her mind working through the implications. If she stayed here, if she lived here for 30 days, the property became legally hers, protected, untouchable. But there was more. Attached to the trust was another survey map. This one showing not just the underground structure, but the surface land. The boundaries extended far beyond what Ruth had assumed. Acres. Not just the clearing. The whole northwest section. And beneath it all, a geological survey, dated 1979, marked confidential. Ruth unfolded it carefully. The technical language was hard to parse, but certain words stood out. Mineral deposits, lithium, significant concentration, commercial viability high. Her stomach dropped. This wasn't about a hole in the ground. This was about what was under it. Carver knew. He had to know. That's why he'd been at the auction, why he'd shown up within hours of her purchase, why $25,000 had been offered for property that sold for $5. Ruth sat back, the pieces assembling in her mind. Sarah's home had been taken in 1980. Thomas had built this place in secret, hidden it, protected it with legal documents the city never found, because they never looked. And now, 43 years later, someone had. Carver, or someone who worked for him. Ruth looked at the documents spread across the table. Evidence, proof, leverage. If she could prove Sarah's property was taken illegally, if she could show the trust was valid, if she could establish residency, she might actually be able to keep this. But first, she needed help. Legal help. The kind she couldn't afford. Ruth gathered the documents carefully, placed them back in the metal case, locked it. She stood, moved to the door, and stopped. A sound from above, faint but distinct. Footsteps. She froze, listened. The footsteps continued. Multiple people, voices, muffled by earth and concrete but getting closer. Ruth moved quickly, back to the bedroom. She grabbed her coat, the metal case, the letters from the hidden compartment, everything that mattered. Then she went to the warm wooden door and opened it. The concrete hallway beyond was cold and gray, the opposite of the home she was leaving behind. She stepped through, pulled the door shut behind her, locked it. The key went into her pocket. The voices were clearer now, coming from the hatch above. Ruth climbed the stairs quietly. At the top, she paused, listened. Garrett's voice. And someone else. Carver. She pushed the hatch open just enough to see. They were standing by Garrett's car, 30 feet away, talking. Ruth pulled herself up slowly, quietly, her movements measured. Garrett saw her first. His face shifted. Guilt, relief, confusion. All at once. Mom, what are you doing here? I could ask you the same thing. Ruth said. Carver turned, smiled, not warmly, with satisfaction. Mrs. Holloway, I was just explaining to your son the concerns we have about this property. Garrett stepped forward. Mom, he contacted me yesterday, told me what you bought. I was worried. Ruth looked at him, then at Carver. You told him it was dangerous. I told him the truth, Carver said smoothly. Unregistered structures, no safety inspections. At your age, Mrs. Holloway, this isn't something you should be managing alone. Garrett's expression was earnest, concerned. Mom, he's offering to help. $100,000. You could get a real place. Assisted living. Somewhere safe. Ruth's voice was quiet. You think I need to be managed? I think you need to be realistic, Garrett said. You're 80 years old. You can't live in a hole in the ground. Why not? Ruth asked. The question hung there. Simple. Unanswerable. Carver stepped in. Mrs. Holloway, your son cares about you. We all do. That's why I'm prepared to make this extremely generous. $100,000. Final offer. You never have to worry about housing again. Ruth looked at the metal case in her hands, at the documents inside, at the proof that men like Carver had been taking things from people like Sarah for decades. She looked at Garrett, at the son who thought money solved problems, who thought age meant incapacity, who thought concern justified control. "No," she said. Garrett blinked. "Mom, please." Ruth turned to Carver. "You know what's under this land. That's why you're here. That's why you were at the auction. You knew before I did." Carver's smile thinned. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." Ruth's voice didn't rise. It hardened. "You knew about the mineral deposits. You knew about the trust. You knew this property was protected. And you thought an 80-year-old woman wouldn't figure it out." Carver's expression changed. The pretense dropped. "You're making assumptions, Mrs. Holloway. Dangerous ones." "I'm making observations," Ruth said, "based on documents, legal documents, ones that show this property was never supposed to be available, never supposed to be forgotten. It was protected, deliberately, by a dead man 40 years ago," Carver said. "Legal protections expire, trusts dissolve, and structures without permits get condemned." Ruth held his gaze. "Is that a threat?" "It's a reality." Carver pulled out his phone, tapped something, put it away. "Within a week, the county will receive an anonymous safety complaint. They'll investigate. And when they find an unregistered underground structure, they'll shut it down. You'll be evicted. For your own safety." Garrett looked between them. "Mom, just take the money." Ruth didn't look at him. She looked at Carver. "You think I'm going to give up because you filed paperwork? I think you're going to give up because you're smart enough to know when you're beaten," Carver said. Ruth smiled. It wasn't pleasant. "The last time someone told me I was beaten, I just lost my home, my husband, everything I'd built. And I believed them. I gave up." She stepped closer to Carver. "Not because I was beaten, because I was tired, and because no one told me I had another option. But I'm not tired anymore, and I have options now." Carver's jaw tightened. "This isn't over." "No," Ruth agreed. "It's not." She walked past him, past Garrett, got into her car, the metal case on the passenger seat, the key to an underground home in her pocket, and drove away. In the rearview mirror, Garrett stood alone. Carver was already on his phone, making calls, filing complaints, setting things in motion. Ruth drove back toward town. Not to the church basement. Not anymore. She had somewhere else to go. Frank Pearson lived in a small house on Sycamore Street. Ruth had looked up his address in the county directory. She pulled up in front at 3 in the afternoon. The lawn was neat, the mailbox hand-painted. A life lived quietly. She knocked, waited. Pearson opened the door, saw her, didn't look surprised. "I wondered when you'd come," he said. "Can we talk?" He stepped aside. "Come in." The inside of his house was exactly what Ruth expected. Books, photographs, a lifetime of careful accumulation. Pearson gestured to a chair, sat across from her, waited. Ruth opened the metal case, set the documents on his coffee table. "You knew," she said. Pearson looked at them, didn't touch them. "Yes." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I couldn't." Pearson's voice was steady, tired. I'm a county clerk. I file paperwork. I run auctions. I don't make judgments about what should or shouldn't be legal. But you knew this property was protected. I knew Thomas Monroe filed a trust in 1983. I knew it was designed to protect someone. I didn't know if it would hold up after 43 years. And I didn't know if you were the person it was meant to protect. Ruth studied him. But you hoped. Pearson nodded slowly. Sarah Monroe was a good woman. She fought the city when they came for her home. She lost. But she never stopped believing she deserved better. Thomas loved her for that. Built her something they couldn't take. But she died before she could use it. He looked at Ruth. When I saw you at that auction, 80 years old, bidding $5 on something no one wanted, I thought maybe this is who it was for. Ruth leaned back. Carver's gonna file a complaint. Try to get the structure condemned. I know, Pearson said. He already did. This morning, anonymous tip. Unsafe underground dwelling. Counties required to investigate. Ruth's stomach dropped. How long do I have hearings in 10 days? If they rule against you, the property gets sealed. You'll be barred from entry. 10 days. Pearson looked at the documents on the table. You need a lawyer, a good one. I can't afford a lawyer. Pearson stood, walked to a desk in the corner, pulled out a business card, came back and handed it to her. Nathaniel Berkshire. He does pro bono work. Used to be homeless. Lived in his car for 2 years. He understands what it means to need a place. Ruth took the card. Thank you. Pearson sat back down. Mrs. Holloway, this isn't going to be easy. Carver Holdings has resources, lawyers, political connections. They've been trying to acquire that land for 5 years. They'll fight hard. Then I'll fight harder, Ruth said. She left Pearson's house with a phone number and a deadline. 10 days to prove she had a right to exist in a place no one thought she deserved. Nathaniel Berkshire's office was above a hardware store on Main Street. Ruth climbed the stairs slowly, her knees aching, her resolve not. The door was unlocked. Inside a waiting room that was more hallway than room, chairs that didn't match, a desk with papers stacked in organized chaos. A man emerged from the back office, mid-40s, suit jacket over a flannel shirt. The kind of lawyer who'd given up on impressing judges and focused on winning cases. Mrs. Holloway. His voice was warm, deep. Nathaniel Berkshire. Frank called. Said you might need help. Ruth shook his hand. I can't pay you. Good, Nate said. Because I don't need money. But I do need interesting cases. And Frank said yours might be the most interesting he's seen in 40 years. They sat. Ruth spread the documents on his desk, explained everything. The auction, the underground home, the letters, the trust, Carver, the hearing. Nate listened without interrupting. When she finished, he leaned back, studied the ceiling, then leaned forward again. Okay, here's what we're dealing with. The good news, Thomas Monroe was thorough. This trust is airtight. If you establish residency for 30 days, the property's legally yours, protected from seizure. And the bad news, you have to make it to 30 days. And Carver's trying to shut you down in 10. Nate tapped the complaint form Pearson had given Ruth. They're claiming the structure is unsafe, unregistered, a public hazard. If the county rules in their favor, you're locked out. Game over. Ruth's jaw tightened. Can they do that? If the structure actually is unsafe, yes. But here's the thing. He pulled out the geological survey. This isn't about safety. It's about lithium. Carver wants the land, the minerals, the development rights. You're in his way. So what do? We prove the structure is safe. We prove the trust is valid. And we prove Carver's complaint is motivated by profit, not public interest. Nate looked at her. But to do that, I need to see this place. I need to document it, photograph it, get an engineer's report. Ruth nodded. When tomorrow morning? Bring me to your $5 inheritance. Let's see what you actually bought. That night, Ruth went back to the church basement, packed her 2 cardboard boxes, everything she owned. By dawn, she'd moved it all underground, into the home Thomas had built, into the place Sarah had never seen, into the only space Ruth had ever walked into and felt like she belonged. She stood in the living room, the warm light glowing, the books waiting, the silence not empty, just patient. Nate arrived at 9. Ruth met him at the surface, led him down the stairs, through the concrete hallway, to the warm wooden door. She unlocked it, opened it, stepped aside. Nate walked in, stopped, stared. Holy God, he whispered. This is real. Ruth smiled faintly. It is. He walked through every room, took photographs, measurements, notes, checked the ventilation, the electrical, the plumbing, everything. When he finished, he came back to the living room and sat down. Just sat. Quiet. Finally, he spoke. This isn't a bunker. It's a home. Yes, Ruth said. Thomas Monroe built this for someone he loved. Someone the world threw away. Yes. And now you're the one living in it. Yes. Nate looked at her. We're going to win, Mrs. Holloway. I don't care what Carver throws at us. We're going to win. Ruth wanted to believe him, but belief required hope, and hope had been in short supply for a long time. 5 days before the hearing, Garrett showed up. Ruth was in the underground kitchen when she heard footsteps above. She climbed the stairs, found him standing at the hatch opening, looking down. Mom. His voice echoed slightly. Can I come down? Ruth hesitated, then nodded. He descended carefully, looked around the concrete hallway, then saw the wooden door. What is that? He asked. Home, Ruth said. Ruth. She opened it. Let him see. Garrett walked in slowly, his expression shifting from skepticism to confusion to something like awe. This was here the whole time, he asked. 43 years, Ruth said. Garrett walked through the rooms, touched the furniture, looked at the books, came back to the living room, sat down. Mom, I don't understand. Why didn't you just sell? Take the money, live somewhere easier? Ruth sat across from him, because easy isn't the same as right. Carver offered $100,000. I know. That's real money, Mom. That's security. No, Ruth said quietly. That's comfort. There's a difference. Garrett looked at his hands. I thought I was helping. When I sold your house. When I told you to be practical. I thought I was protecting you. You were protecting yourself, Ruth said, from having to worry about me, from having to make space for me, from having to deal with the inconvenience of an aging mother. Garrett flinched. That's not fair. Neither is being 80 and having nowhere to go, Ruth said. But here we are. Silence settled between them, heavy, real. Finally, Garrett spoke. What do you need? Ruth looked at him. To know you're on my side. Garrett met her eyes. I am. I'm sorry I wasn't before, but I am now. Ruth nodded once. Then stay. Help Nate prepare. Testify at the hearing if we need you. Garrett stayed. For 3 days, he and Nate worked, documenting, organizing, building a case. Ruth watched them, grateful, wary, not yet trusting, but beginning to hope. 2 days before the hearing, Ruth found Sarah's diary. It was in a drawer in the bedroom, small, leather-bound. The pages yellowed but intact. She opened it carefully, flipped through. Most entries were mundane. Daily observations, weather, meals, the quiet documentation of a life lived alone. But near the end, the tone changed. March 14th, 1980. They delivered the notice today. Eminent domain. 60 days to vacate. I told them I wouldn't go. Thomas says I'm being stubborn. Maybe I am. But this is my home. I bought it in 1952 with money I saved teaching. I raised my son here. Buried my husband from here. They don't get to take it just because they want the land. March 28th, 1980. Thomas showed me the plans today. An underground home. Hidden. Safe. He wants me to leave before they force me out. But leaving feels like surrender. I don't know what to do. April 10th, 1980. I told Thomas no. I'm staying. I'm fighting. He looked sad. But he said he'd finish building it anyway. For me. For later. For whoever needs it next. Ruth's throat tightened. She kept reading. June 2nd, 1980. They came with bulldozers. I stood on my porch and refused to leave. The police carried me out. Literally carried me. I'm 72 years old, and they carried me like I was furniture. June 5th, 1980. Thomas picked me up from the station, took me to his house. I slept in his guest room, woke up and cried. Not because I lost, because I fought and it didn't matter. June 10th, 1980. Thomas says the underground home is almost done. He wants me to see it. I told him I would, but I don't know if I can. Walking into a place built for safety feels like admitting I need protection, and I'm not ready to admit that. The entries stop there. The next page was dated March 1983. I chose not to hide. I wanted to fight for my home above ground. But Thomas was right. Sometimes the fight isn't about winning. It's about making sure the next woman doesn't have to fight alone. If someone finds this, know that I tried. And know that Thomas built you something they can't take. Use it. Don't let them erase you the way they erased me. The diary ended there. Ruth closed it carefully, her eyes wet, her hands steady. Sarah had fought and lost, and died knowing she'd lost. But she'd left something behind. Not just a home, a message, a warning, a gift. Ruth stood, placed the diary on the table next to Thomas's letters. Evidence, proof, history. Tomorrow was the hearing. Tomorrow she'd stand in front of a judge and fight for the right to exist in a place people like Carver thought she didn't deserve. She didn't know if she'd win. But she knew she wouldn't give up. Not like she had before. Not when Sarah and Thomas had given her a second chance. Ruth looked around the warm room, at the light, the books, the quiet dignity of a place built for someone who never got to use it. "This is for you, Sarah," she whispered, "and for me, and for every woman they tried to forget." Then she went to bed, ready, resolute, and no longer alone. The county courthouse had been built in 1957. Red brick, white columns. The kind of building designed to make people feel small. When they walked up the steps, Ruth climbed them slowly. One hand on the railing, one hand gripping the metal case that held everything that mattered. Nate walked beside her. His suit was pressed, his briefcase heavy with documents. Behind them, Garrett followed. Quiet, nervous, but present. The hearing room was smaller than Ruth expected. Not a courtroom, just a conference room with a long table at the front where 3 county officials sat. Neutral faces, measured voices. The kind of people who made decisions about other people's lives and went home to dinner without losing sleep. Chairs filled the back of the room. Spectators, not many. A few reporters. Some curious locals who'd heard about the 80-year-old woman fighting a development company. People drawn to conflict the way moths are drawn to light. Not because they care, because they want to see what happens when something burns. Carver sat at the opposite table. 3 lawyers with him. Expensive suits, leather folders. The kind of legal team that charges by the hour and wins by exhaustion. Ruth took her seat next to Nate, set the metal case on the table, folded her hands on top of it. The official in the center, a woman named Margaret Chen, cleared her throat. The room quieted. "This is a hearing to address complaint number 2026-347, filed regarding an unregistered structure located on County Route 14. The complaint alleges safety violations and requests immediate condemnation of the property." She looked at Ruth. "Mrs. Holloway, you are the current owner of record. Is that correct?" "Yes," Ruth said, her voice steady. "And you purchased this property at public auction 6 days ago for $5. Yes." Chen glanced at her notes. "The complaint alleges that the structure on this property is unregistered, uninspected, and potentially hazardous. Do you dispute these allegations?" "I dispute the characterization," Ruth said. not the facts. One of the other officials, a man with gray hair and reading glasses, leaned forward. "Mrs. Holloway, are you aware that underground residential structures require specific permits, engineering surveys, safety inspections?" "I am now," Ruth said. "Were you aware when you purchased the property number?" The man exchanged a look with Chen. "Then the concern here is clear. You've taken ownership of a structure that may not meet safety standards. At your age, the risk of injury, accident, or worse." "At my age," Ruth interrupted gently, "I've survived plenty of unsafe situations. Church basements with faulty wiring, rental rooms with mold in the walls, sleeping in my car during a snowstorm because I had nowhere else to go." The room went very quiet. Ruth continued. "So, forgive me if I don't find your concern particularly convincing. You're not worried about my safety. You're worried about liability." Chen's expression didn't change. "Mrs. Holloway, this hearing is about whether the structure meets code, not about your personal history." "My personal history is why I'm here," Ruth said. "Because people like you have been telling people like me where we can and can't live for a very long time. And usually the places we can't live are the places someone else wants." Carver's lead attorney stood. A man in his 50s named Douglas Reeve. "With respect, Your Honor, this is exactly the kind of emotional deflection that wastes the court's time. The facts are simple. The structure is unregistered. It has no permits. It poses a potential danger to the occupant and the surrounding area. The county has a legal obligation to condemn it." Chen nodded. "Mr. Berkshire, do you have a response?" Nate stood. "We do." He opened his briefcase, pulled out a thick folder, and set it on the table. The structure in question was built in 1982 by Thomas Monroe, a licensed architect with 40 years of experience in underground construction. It was designed to exceed all contemporary safety standards, and it has maintained those standards for 43 years. Reeves smiled thinly. "Contemporary standards from 1982 are not current standards." "Correct," Nate said. "Which is why we had the structure independently inspected 3 days ago." He pulled out a report, handed copies to the officials. To Reeve. "This is a full engineering assessment conducted by Carson and Associates. Their conclusion, the structure is not only safe but exceeds current code requirements for ventilation, electrical systems, and structural integrity." Reeve flipped through the report. His expression tightened. "This doesn't address the registration issue. An unregistered structure is still illegal regardless of safety." Nate pulled out another document. "This is the original construction permit, filed with the county in March 1982. Approved, stamped, signed by the county engineer at the time, Harold Vickers." Reeves' jaw clenched. "If that permit exists, why wasn't the structure on county records?" "Good question," Nate said. He pulled out more papers. "These are administrative logs from 1983. In June of that year, approximately 200 property files were transferred from the old county office to the new one. 47 of those files were lost in the transfer, including this one. The structure wasn't unregistered," Nate continued. "It was administratively lost. There's a difference." Chen looked at the documents, studied them carefully, then looked at Reeve. "Mr. Reeve, do you have evidence that contradicts?" This Reeve hesitated. "We would need time to verify the authenticity of these documents." How much time? Chen asked. A week. Maybe 2. Chen shook her head. This hearing is today. If you don't have contradicting evidence now, we proceed with what's in front of us. Reeve sat down, his expression hard. Chen looked at Ruth. Mrs. Holloway, even if the structure is safe and was legally permitted, there's still the question of whether you're capable of maintaining it. You're 80 years old. You have no technical expertise, no support system. At your age, are you prepared to take on that responsibility? The question hung in the air, heavy, loaded. Ruth stood slowly. Her knees cooperated. She looked at Chen, then at the other officials, then at the room. I've been asked that question in different ways for the past 5 years. She said, am I capable? Am I strong enough? Am I young enough? The answer people want is no, because no makes everything easier for everyone else. Her voice didn't rise, it deepened. I lost my home 3 years ago, not because I couldn't afford it, because my son convinced me selling was the practical choice, and maybe it was, for him. But for me, it meant losing the place where I'd lived for 30 years, where I'd raised a family, where I'd buried a husband, where I'd existed without asking anyone's permission. She paused. Let the silence to sit. After that, I moved between spare rooms, guest bedrooms, church basements, places people gave me out of kindness and took back out of necessity. And every time I had to leave, I was told it was for my own good, that I needed to understand my limitations, that at my age I should be grateful for what I could get. Ruth's hands tightened slightly on the edge of the table. So, when I found a place no one else wanted, a place I could afford with the $5 in my purse, a place that had been waiting for 43 years for someone to need it, I didn't ask if I was capable. I asked if I deserved it. She looked directly at Chen, and the answer is yes. Not because I'm strong, not because I'm young, but because I'm still here. And being here means I haven't given up, even when the world told me I should. The room was absolutely silent. Ruth continued, You're not asking if the structure is safe. You're asking if I deserve to occupy it. And I'm telling you, the question isn't about capability. It's about dignity. It's about whether an 80-year-old woman has the right to say, this is mine, and have that mean something. She sat down, her heart pounding, her hands steady. Chen wrote something, didn't look up. Then she did. Mr. Berkshire, do you have any other evidence to present? One more thing, Nate said. He gestured to Garrett. I'd like to call a witness. Garrett stood, walked to the front, sat in the chair indicated. Chen looked at him. State your name for the record. Garrett Holloway. And your relationship to Mrs. Holloway. I'm her son. Reeve stood immediately. Objection. Family testimony is biased. Chen looked at him. This isn't a trial, Mr. Reeve. I'll allow it. She turned to Garrett. Mr. Holloway, what would you like to say? Garrett looked at his mother, then at the officials. 3 years ago, I convinced my mother to sell her home. I told her it was the practical choice, that she couldn't manage the maintenance, the expenses, that at her age, downsizing made sense. He swallowed. I was wrong. Reeve shifted in his seat. Garrett continued. I wasn't thinking about what she needed. I was thinking about what was easier for me. And after she sold, I watched her move from place to place. Always temporary. Always apologizing for needing space. Always making herself smaller so she wouldn't inconvenience anyone. His voice cracked slightly. I told myself I was helping. But I was just making her someone else's problem. Chen's expression softened just slightly. And now I've seen the place she bought. Garrett looked at Ruth. It's not a hole in the ground. It's a home. A real home. Built by someone who understood that some people need a place the world can't take away. And my mother found it. Not because she's incapable. Because she refused to believe she didn't deserve it. Is she capable of maintaining it? Chen asked. Garrett nodded. More capable than I gave her credit for. More capable than she's had the chance to prove in years. Thank you, Mr. Holloway, Chen said. You can sit down. Garrett returned to his seat. Didn't look at Carver. Didn't look at the lawyers. Just sat next to his mother and waited. Chen conferred quietly with the other two officials. The conversation lasted 3 minutes. Maybe 4. Time moved differently when your future was being decided by people who didn't know you. Finally, Chen looked up. Based on the evidence presented, this hearing finds the following. 1. The structure was legally permitted in 1982. 2. It meets current safety standards as verified by independent inspection. 3. Mrs. Holloway has demonstrated both capability and intent to maintain the property. Ruth's chest tightened. The complaint is dismissed. The property will not be condemned. Mrs. Holloway retains full ownership and access. Chen banged the gavel once. Hearing adjourned. The room erupted. Not with cheers, just movement. People standing, talking. Reporters scribbling notes. But Ruth didn't move. She sat perfectly still, her hands on the metal case, her eyes closed. Nate put a hand on her shoulder. We won. Ruth opened her eyes, nodded. Didn't trust herself to speak. Across the room, Reeve was packing his briefcase, moving quickly, efficiently. Carver stood beside him, phone already to his ear, making calls, adjusting strategy. Men like him didn't stop because they lost once. But for now, Ruth had won. And that was enough. Outside the courthouse, the October air was sharp and clean. Ruth stood on the steps, breathing it in. Garrett stood beside her. Quiet. Then he spoke. Mom, I'm sorry. I know, Ruth said. I should have been on your side from the beginning. Yes. Ruth looked at him. But you're here now. That matters. Garrett nodded. What do you need? Going forward. What can I do? Visit, Ruth said. Regularly. Not out of obligation. Because you want to. I do want to, Garrett said. And I want to help. Whatever you need. Maintenance, supplies, anything. Ruth smiled faintly. I'll let you know. They stood together for a moment. Then Nate emerged from the courthouse, grinning. That, he said, was the most satisfying win I've had in years. Ruth shook his hand. Thank you. Don't thank me. Nate's expression turned serious. Thank Thomas Monroe. He built something Carver couldn't tear down. That's rare. He will again, Ruth said. Carver, he won't stop. Nate nodded. Probably not. But you've got 30 days to establish residency. After that, the trust activates. Property becomes legally untouchable. Just stay there. Don't leave. Document everything. And in a month, this is over. Ruth understood. 1 month, 30 days. She could do that. She drove back to the property, alone, parked at the edge of the clearing, walked to the hatch, descended into the concrete hallway, unlocked the warm wooden door. Home. She stepped inside, set the metal case on the table, sat down, and for the first time in 3 years cried. Not from sadness, from relief, from exhaustion, from the overwhelming weight of having something that was actually hers. The tears didn't last long. Ruth wasn't a woman who indulged in emotion, but she allowed herself that moment. Then she wiped her eyes, stood up, and started living. 2 days later, Carver came back. Not to the property. To the coffee shop where Ruth had gone to buy groceries. She was loading bags into her car when a black SUV pulled up beside her. Carver stepped out, alone this time. No lawyers, no associates, just him. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, "can we talk?" Ruth closed her trunk. "We're talking." Carver smiled, thinner than before. "You won your hearing. Congratulations. Thank you. But you know this isn't over." I assumed. Carver leaned against his SUV. "You're a smart woman, smarter than I gave you credit for. So let me speak plainly. That land is worth millions. The mineral deposits alone are worth 20 times what I've offered. And I'm going to get it, one way or another." Ruth looked at him. "Is that a threat?" "It's a reality." Carver's voice didn't rise. It stayed calm. "Reasonable. I can wait 30 days. I can wait 30 years, but eventually you'll sell. Or you'll die. And when that happens, the property goes to probate. To your son. And he'll sell. Because he understands numbers." Ruth held his gaze. "You're probably right." Carver blinked, surprised. "You're agreeing I'm acknowledging reality," Ruth said. "I'm 80. I won't live forever. And when I'm gone, Garrett might sell. Probably will sell. So why fight?" "Because I'm not dead yet." Ruth's voice hardened. "And while I'm alive, this place is mine. Not yours. Not the county's. Mine. And I'm gonna live there, and I'm gonna die there. And you're gonna wait." Carver's smile disappeared. 500,000. Final offer. Right now. You never have to think about this again. Ruth picked up her grocery bags. "I've already thought about it. The answer's no." She walked past him, got in her car, started the engine. Carver called after her. "You're making a mistake." Ruth rolled down her window. "No, I'm correcting one." She drove away. In the rearview mirror, Carver stood alone in the parking lot, phone already out, making more calls. But this time, Ruth wasn't afraid. She'd won the hearing. She'd established her right, and in 28 days, the property would be legally protected forever. All she had to do was survive. The days that followed settled into a rhythm. Ruth woke with the gradual brightening of lights, made coffee in the kitchen Thomas had built, read books from the shelves Sarah had never touched, existed in a space that asked nothing of her except that she be there. Garrett visited twice a week, brought supplies, fixed small things, a loose cabinet hinge, a flickering bulb, acts of service that felt like apology and reconciliation all at once. Nate came once to document her residency, took photographs, time-stamped everything, built a record that would hold up in court if Carver tried again. And Ruth waited, not passively, actively, deliberately, claiming space she'd earned. On day 23, someone knocked on the hatch above. Ruth climbed the stairs, opened it carefully. A woman stood there. Late 60s, worn coat, a suitcase beside her, eyes that had seen too much and expected nothing. "I'm sorry to bother you," the woman said, her voice hesitant. "The clerk at the county office, Frank Pearson. He said you might have space." Ruth looked at her. Space for what? The woman's eyes welled. "Anywhere. I got evicted. Medical bills. I couldn't keep up. And I don't have family. I don't have anywhere." Ruth recognized that expression, had worn it herself not long ago. "What's your name, Carol?" the woman said. "Carol Stevens." Ruth stepped aside. "Come in." Carol descended slowly, looked around the concrete hallway, then saw the warm wooden door. "What is this place?" Home Ruth said. "If you need it to be." She showed Carol to the second bedroom, the one that had been waiting. Carol stood in the doorway staring. "I can't pay you." "I'm not asking you to," Ruth said. "Just stay. Help when you can. Leave when you're ready." Carol's face crumpled. She sat on the edge of the bed and cried. Ruth left her there, gave her privacy, gave her time, gave her what Ruth had needed most and received least: space to feel without judgment. That night they ate dinner together. Simple food, quiet conversation. Two women who'd been erased by the world sharing a table in a place that refused to forget them. On day 28, another knock. A younger woman this time, 74. Hispanic features, strong hands worn from labor. Her name was Rosa. She'd been living with her daughter until the fights got too frequent and the accusations too sharp. "You're a burden. You're too much. Why can't you just go to a home?" Ruth showed her to the third bedroom. Rosa cried too, but her tears were angry, frustrated. The tears of someone who'd given everything and been told it wasn't enough. The three women existed together, not as friends yet, just as people who understood what it meant to need shelter and find it in a place the world had overlooked. On day 30, Ruth woke to the sound of voices in the kitchen. Carol and Rosa making breakfast, talking quietly, laughing at something small and unimportant and real. Ruth lay in bed for the moment listening. Then she got up, joined them, sat at the table Thomas had built, drank coffee in the home Sarah had never seen, and for the first time in years felt like she belonged to something larger than her own survival. That afternoon, Nate called. "It's official. 30 days. The trust is activated. Property's legally yours. Protected. Carver can't touch it." Ruth closed her eyes. "Thank you. Congratulations, Mrs. Holloway. You did it." She hung up, stood in the living room, looked around. At the books, the furniture, the warm light, the space that had waited 43 years for her to find it. "We did it," she whispered. To Thomas, to Sarah, to everyone who'd believed a person deserved a place, even when the world said otherwise. 3 months later, the space had transformed, not physically, but in presence. 4 women now, then 5, then 6, each one brought by Pearson, by Nate, by word of mouth among people who knew what it meant to have nowhere to go. Ruth didn't advertise, didn't recruit, didn't make rules beyond the essentials. Respect the space. Help when you can. Stay as long as you need. The women ranged in age from 68 to 84. Different backgrounds, different histories, but all sharing the same fundamental experience. The world had decided they were done, and they'd refused to believe it. They cooked together, shared books, told stories, argued about politics and recipes, and whether the ventilation made the air too dry. The arguments were good. They meant comfort, familiarity, the luxury of disagreeing with someone who wasn't going to ask you to leave because of it. Garrett visited every Sunday, brought his daughter sometimes. A girl of 14 who listened to the women's stories with wide eyes and asked questions no one had asked in years. What was it like when you were young? What did you want to be? Did you get to do it? The women answered honestly. Sometimes yes, mostly no. But we're still here, and that counts for something. One evening in January, Ruth sat in the library. The hidden panel was open. The letters from Thomas to Sarah spread across the table. She'd been reading them again, slowly, carefully, trying to understand the man who'd built this place. Carol found her there, sat down quietly. "What are those letters?" Ruth said. "From the man who built this place to the woman he built it for. Did she ever live here? No. She died before she could." Carol was quiet for a moment. Then why did he finish it? Ruth looked at the letters, at the careful handwriting, at the evidence of love that had outlasted death. Because he understood something important. Some things aren't built for the people who need them. They're built for the people who will need them. Carol nodded slowly. "Like us." "Yes, like us." That night, Ruth wrote a letter of her own, not to anyone specific, to whoever came next. She wrote about finding the place, about the hearing, about Carver and Garrett and the women who'd made this house a home. She wrote about Sarah, about Thomas, about the gift of being seen when the world had decided you were invisible. And at the end, she wrote, "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and it means you're the one who needs this place now. Don't be afraid. Don't apologize. Don't ask permission. This place was built for you. Not because you earned it, because you survived. And survival is enough." Stay as long as you need. Help when you can. And when you leave, make sure someone else knows this place exists. Because the world will try to forget it. And we can't let that happen. She signed it simply, Ruth. Then she placed it in an envelope, sealed it, set it on the table in the living room where Thomas had left his letter for her. The circle complete. Outside, winter had settled over the field. Snow covered the ground, hid the hatch, made the surface look like nothing more than empty land, worthless, forgotten. But below, lights glowed. Voices moved through rooms. Women who'd been told they were too old, too much, too late lived in a space that had been waiting for them all along. Ruth stood in the kitchen one morning in February, making tea. The routine familiar now, comforting. Rosa was reading in the library. Carol was reorganizing the storage room. A new woman, Margaret, was in the shower, still getting used to the miracle of hot water and privacy. Garrett appeared at the top of the stairs, called down. "Mom, can I come in?" Ruth climbed up, met him at the hatch. He looked cold, his breath visible in the winter air. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah." He smiled. "Just wanted to check in, see if you needed anything." "We're good," Ruth said. "Then you want to come down? Have some tea." Garrett hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that." They descended together, into the warmth, into the light, into the home his mother had claimed when he'd told her it was impossible. In the kitchen, Ruth poured tea. They sat at the table, quiet at first. Then Garrett spoke. "I've been thinking about something." Ruth waited. "When you're gone," he said slowly, "whenever that is. I'm not selling this place." Ruth looked at him. "Carver will offer a lot of money, I know. But you were right. Some things matter more." He met her eyes. "I want to keep it the way you've kept it, for people who need it." Ruth's throat tightened. She reached across the table, put her hand over his. "Thank you." They sat like that for a moment, mother and son, reconciled not through apology, but through understanding, through the slow work of making different choices and meaning them. Later that evening, Ruth stood in the doorway of the living room, watching. Carol and Rosa were playing cards. Margaret was reading. Another woman, Helen, was knitting. Normal life. Unremarkable life. The kind of life no one writes articles about or makes movies about because it's too quiet, too ordinary. But to the women living it, it was everything. Ruth thought about the auction room, about the laughter, about the man who'd said she was buying a burial plot, about Carver's offers and threats, and certainty that money mattered more than dignity. She thought about Sarah, fighting until they carried her away, dying without ever seeing the place Thomas had built. And she thought about Thomas, finishing a home for someone who'd never lived there, leaving it for the next person, and the next, and the next. Some things wait, the note had said. Ruth understood now. This place hadn't been waiting for her specifically. It had been waiting for anyone who needed proof that they still mattered, that their existence wasn't conditional on convenience or productivity or youth. It had been waiting for someone to say, "This is mine," and mean it. The women in the living room laughed at something. The sound carried through the space. Warm, real, alive. Ruth smiled, turned off the kitchen light, joined them. Above ground, the field remained empty, unmarked, wild. No sign advertised what lay beneath. No plaque commemorated the people who'd built it or the people who'd found it. Just snow and grass and earth that held a secret the world had tried to erase. But below, in the warm light, in the carefully built rooms, in the space that asked nothing except that people stay, Ruth Holloway lived. Not waiting to die. Not apologizing for existing. Just living. Deliberately. Defiantly. Surrounded by women who'd also refused to disappear. And when she looked around the room at the faces that had become familiar, at the home that had become theirs, she thought of the note her father had given her 63 years ago. Pay attention to the one no one enters. She had. And it had saved her life. Not because it was valuable. Not because it was comfortable. But because it was hers. And because, in a world that told 80-year-old women they'd used up their space, this place said differently. It said, you belong here. You've always belonged here. And no one can take that away. Ruth closed her eyes, breathed in the warm air, and knew for the first time in years that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Home.